Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ethics Essay Clinic. I am Eric Matheson, and in this series I have been walking through grading essays for my Introduction to Bioethics course. So I've graded an A essay already, and I've graded a B essay already. In this video, I'm going to grade a C essay, look at what it does well, and look at how the student could improve. Let's do it. So this paper is about the consistency argument that some philosophers make between abortion and infanticide, in particular late-term abortion. So Jeff McMahon is one of the philosophers who makes this argument, and he says that we should treat late-term abortion and infanticide consistently. That is, if one is wrong, then the other is wrong, and if one is okay, then the other is okay. The argument for this is that the intrinsic features of the late stage fetus and the born baby are identical. So if you take a fetus that gets born prematurely, say it gets born 5 weeks premature, all that has changed really is its location. It used to be in the womb, connected to the mother. Now it's outside of the womb and it can survive on its own. It's viable, maybe needs a little bit of extra support in the hospital, but it can survive. So McMahon's argument is that since there's no difference in the biology or the development of the fetus that's 5 weeks from full term, and the baby that gets born prematurely, then that there really isn't a difference between their development, so we should treat them the same. That's what the argument is. Let's look at the paper. The title for the paper is Discerning Abortion from Infanticide. I've said before in other videos that your title is an easy way to give your thesis. So in this case, the student is going to argue against the consistency argument. So saying clearly, this gives us a sense, discerning abortion from infanticide, but it could be much clearer by saying there is a big difference between abortion and infanticide, or abortion and infanticide are not the same. By doing that, you are already priming the reader for what your view is. Makes it already in the reader's mind. They go, oh, okay, this is clear. I know what the paper is going to argue. So putting that in is a nice way of setting that up. Opening sentence. In this paper, I will argue that there is a strict division between abortion and infanticide. Therefore, permitting abortion should not dictate the permission of infanticide. Nice. That is a great setup. It's very clear. The student is saying that there's this difference, so we shouldn't treat them the same. That's a nice thesis statement. Going on. Here's the background section. Abortion is a standard and well-known procedure in contemporary society involving the deliberate termination of the developing fetus in early-stage pregnancy. Differentiably, the law defines infanticide as the willful act or omission she, a female person, causes the death of her newly born child. And the student has cited the Criminal Code of Canada. Certain philosophers argue for consistency across the two situations, stating that the legal permission for abortion should subsequently permit infanticide. This argument for consistency is reciprocal, debating the legality of both abortion and infanticide, considering whether both should be illegal or permissible. Regardless, these philosophers highlight that the two circumstances should be treated equally. Okay, so in terms of the setup, this is not too bad. The student has gone and found a definition of the law about infanticide, and there's, I guess they've captured the basics of it. There are just a few things about this intro or this background section that could be improved for clarity. One of them, and we're going to see that this plays a key role in this paper, is that the student is defining abortion in a narrow way. So they say in that first sentence, abortion is a standard and well-known procedure in contemporary society involving the deliberate termination of the developing fetus in early stage pregnancy. Now, is it the case that abortions only occur in the early stages of pregnancy? No, that's not true. Most, like the vast majority of abortions take place in early stage pregnancy, but that's not actually what it means to have an abortion. A late stage abortion or late term abortion is a thing. That's the basis of the argument. So defining abortion as only something that occurs in early stage pregnancy is a misdefinition. It's misstating what it means to have an abortion. The next thing I want to mention about this is that the student has been a bit vague about the people involved. So they say certain philosophers argue for consistency across the two situations, stating that the legal permission for abortion should subsequently permit infanticide. Now, one thing that would make this much more helpful is to say which philosophers it is. So in the course, in my lecture slides, I mention Jeff McMahon and Peter Singer and others who give this argument. So it wouldn't really be that much of a ask to include that. That would make it much clearer. And also just in terms of the description here, the student says that the legal permission for abortion should subsequently permit infanticide. But the consistency argument is just a point about consistency. It's a conditional. If late-term abortions are permitted, then infanticide should be permitted. Or if infanticide should not be permitted, then late-term abortions should not be permitted. So usually what it means to give a consistency argument is that we should treat them the same. Some of those philosophers go further and add that not just that we should treat them the same, but we should treat them in this particular way. But this prompt in my questions or in the assignment description was just about the consistency argument. So the student is adding this extra step here that, strictly speaking, is not part of the argument. All right, let's read on. Abortion and infanticide are two explicitly different circumstances, and treating them similarly completely negates this fact. Abortion is terminating an early-stage fetus. Contrastingly, infanticide constitutes the willful murder of a newborn. Declaring that infanticide and abortion should receive similar treatment for the sake of consistency essentially compares the death of an underdeveloped fetus to the murder of a developed infant. The two stages of development are comparably different under a medical lens and should not be equated to acknowledge the various ethical considerations of each circumstance. An early-staged fetus cannot be considered a life due to underdevelopment and lack of consciousness. At the same time, newborns possess these properties and societal recognition of their individuality. The fetus has no vitality outside of the womb, which inherently falls under the pregnant woman's autonomy due to fetal dependency. In contrast, an infant is separate from its mother and has the potential for independent survival, making infanticide a direct violation of their rights as an individual. The disparity between the two circumstances lies in the willful decision to take a life by committing infanticide and the autonomous decision over one's own body in retrospect to abortion. So the student is making a good argument in the sense that they're making this distinction. They're really clarifying what the difference is in their mind between abortion on the one hand and infanticide on the other. And the argument that they're making is that they're two different things because abortion is about an early stage fetus that isn't viable, it's not able to live on its own, it's not fully developed in the way a newborn is. And a newborn is all of the opposites. Able to live on its own, is more fully developed. And so given that, makes sense that we should make this distinction between the ethics of abortion and the ethics of infanticide. The problem is that's actually not what the consistency argument is. So the student has misunderstood what's going on in the argument. I flagged this before when I mentioned that that passage that the student has repeated a couple times now, that abortion is about early stage abortion, earlier on in the pregnancy. Again, most abortions are early stage abortions, but some aren't, and that is what the point of the consistency argument is. So, the problem is that since it's not the case that all abortions are early stage abortions, that means that this argument that the student's making doesn't really work. The philosophers who are making the consistency argument are not talking about early stage abortions. They are talking about late stage abortions, like third trimester abortions. And they're making that comparison to infanticide. So saying they're not the same because the fetus isn't as developed yet and so on, that's actually kind of like redefining the problem. And to use some kind of, to use some lingo, it's a straw man argument because the student has set up this, this argument that's actually not really what the philosophers are talking about. So that's kind of the big picture problem, I think, going on here. Another thing is that so one is that kind of their description of abortion. But their description of infanticide is also actually a mischaracterization. So you'll remember that earlier on they say, they quote the Criminal Code of Canada, that the law defines infanticide as the willful act or omission that causes the death of her newly born child. And the student in the argument section describes that abortion is terminating an early stage fetus. Contrastingly, infanticide constitutes the willful murder of a newborn. And one type of infanticide could be willful murder. That's the Criminal Code of Canada sense. But not all infanticides need to be like that. And this is part of the debate. So if a child is born and during birth, during labor, say it gets the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck and loses oxygen for a while, or suffers some other injury, or there was some other serious health condition that wasn't picked up in testing. Unfortunately, these things happen, and in those cases, if the child is very sick, is unlikely to recover or to benefit, and might in some cases only be able to live for days or weeks, then parents and healthcare providers will make the decision to let the child die. These are absolutely tragic cases, but that is like in the kind of like broader sense of the definition of the term. Those are also cases of infanticide. So those are we could debate about, separate question a little bit about if that's always right or always wrong, or what would make it right or wrong. But just saying, like, calling it willful murder, calling it murder in particular, is making this claim about a judgment about those cases that might not apply in every single case. Of course, there are cases of where it is properly homicide and people get charged for it. But there are other cases in healthcare where it's not like that. So the main argument, they're making this talking about this consistency argument between abortion and infanticide, but their description of abortion is not kind of fully encapsulating all the types of abortion that there are. And their description of infanticide is not really fully capturing all the types of infanticide that they are. So this is setting up to get them into trouble. All right, here's the objection to their view. One might argue against this discerning logic by addressing the similarity between the two stages of development. Although the fetus lacks self-sustainability without the mother's womb, it still could be considered a life due to its potential for future development and the presence of societal and biologically recognized indicators of life, such as a heartbeat. Similarly, an infant, although able to function independently, is still dependent on others for survival and care. A newborn infant has no autonomy, regardless of separation from its mother's womb. Instead, the mother makes autonomous decisions on the infant's behalf. As a result, the disparity between the two stages of life becomes unclear. Both a fetus and a newborn could be seen as human lives that lack full autonomy. Thus, the argument that infanticide and abortion should both either be permissible or prohibited becomes valid due to the equal circumstances. If abortion involves the intended death of life, then it doesn't prove to be much different from infanticide, which questions the medicalization of one and the criminalization of the other. So this is a nice objection, actually. So the argument that the student makes, the original argument, is that there's this big difference between abortion and infanticide. And the difference is really about the development of the fetus, or the characteristics in each case. So abortion, the student says, is about early term abortions when the fetus is not fully developed. And infanticide, it's a born baby, a fully developed baby. So that's what makes a big difference. So the objection, a good objection, directly responds to the argument instead of making a separate point. This is a great example of that. The student's objection is making a direct response to their initial argument. The objection is that, well, actually, there are these ways that even early term fetuses and newborn babies, that they do have these characteristics in common. Neither one is autonomous. They both require lots of support. And the student gives a couple other examples of ways that the early term fetus and the newborn baby are not really that different. That's that's a nice objection. All right, here's the response. However, this counterargument is very one-dimensional, as it fails to acknowledge the importance of birth, which creates a disparity between the infant and the fetus. While an infant needs the care and support of others for survival, unlike a fetus, it still has consciousness and the capacity to rely on its own biological functions. These characteristics of the infant set it apart from an early-stage fetus, which has yet to develop a consciousness or independent biological attributes. Consciousness and self-reliance allow the infant to be socially and legally recognized as an individual with rights. In contrast to an early-stage fetus, society unanimously considers an infant as a life, and the legal system guarantees their rights from birth. Thus, a separation between abortion and infanticide is created through the termination of a potential life versus the murder of a sentient being with protected rights. Therefore, the magnitude of the implications of each circumstance must be considered. A fetus has less moral significance due to a lack of consciousness and self-reliance. Early-stage fetuses are insentient and are not comparable to a sentient infant. Subsequently, infanticide and abortion are not equivalent and should not be similarly criminalized or medicalized as such. So moving back, starting from the end of that, which is the end of the paper. Actually, this is a nice conclusion. The student kind of wraps it up without having a lengthy conclusion, which is often unnecessary, or is definitely unnecessary in a paper that's short. So I like that kind of final, in summary, here's the big difference. So the initial argument was about that there's quite a difference between early term fetuses and newborn babies. The objection was that no, actually there are ways that they're actually quite similar. And then the response here says no, again they're actually different. So it is a good response in the sense that it is going back and responding to the objection. So it's not making a totally different point, which is good. One of the things, this is just what is difficult about the argument, objection, response pattern, is that sometimes the response will end up restating the original argument, even if it's in kind of different words. And that's something that happens in this response, is that the student is making some points that don't come up in the argument, but it basically has the same overall point, which is that no, actually there is this, or there are these important differences between the fetus and the newborn baby. So developmentally they're different, which is the main point in the original argument. One thing that didn't come up in the argument that comes up here is about legal recognition, that the newborns have legal recognition, they're given rights, and early term fetuses are not. But I mean, that's true, but this is in a sense kind of what's called begging the question, that it's assuming that is a justified result, and somebody who thinks that there is no different, there are people who think that abortions are always wrong, And people who are arguing that the law should change to give legal rights to fetuses regardless of their gestational age, they're not going to be convinced by that. So the student is appealing to some evidence here, and I think that the people who are opposed to this view would not find it very convincing. Let me talk through now about why this paper got a C. C is satisfactory, and I think that this is a good example of a C paper. One of its strengths is that it's easy to follow. There aren't a lot of points in the argument where I'm not clear what's going on. It's written fairly clearly. There are some, a few typos or some grammatical things that could be cleared up. Sometimes the writing gets a little bit verbose, or could just be more precise. But overall, one of the strengths of this paper is that it's written pretty well. It's pretty easy to follow. The biggest issue that the paper runs into is this kind of redefinitional problem that I talked about, that the student is talking about abortion in terms of early stage abortions. And the problem with that is that not all abortions are early stage abortions. And in particular, that the consistency argument is about late-term abortions and infanticide. So by redefining abortions to just talking about early-stage abortions, that is kind of missing the significance of the argument, and therefore that kind of sets the whole paper up for problems. There's a similar sort of issue with the kind of definition of infanticide as willful murder. Again, sometimes infanticide is willful murder, and when we think about infanticide, we are going to think about the cases where it's wrong. But infanticide doesn't the term neutrally defined does not have to be always wrong. It happens in healthcare now. There are tragedies, but in those cases, the people who defend infanticide will argue that, just like in other end-of-life cases, keeping the child alive when it's not going to benefit and it's only going to experience suffering is not ethically justified. So both of those definitional points are issues for the paper. Other stuff. I think setting those problems aside, I think given the argument, I think the objection is a great objection. I think that it's perfectly encapsulated, or kind of shows the case for the other side. I think the response is a bit less strong because it really just restates the argument. So it would be nicer to have something that, without making a totally different point, looks at something deeper or actually kind of points out a problem with the objection. Overall, this is a good example of a C paper. I think that the main ways to improve are just with the argument itself, that by if the student had avoided those definitional mistakes, I think right away, given the clarity of the writing and given the other points, I think this could have pretty easily been turned into a B paper or maybe even higher. All right. That's it for the ethics essay clinic. I hope you've enjoyed this series. If you have other videos or other questions that you'd like for me to answer or like me to make, please leave a comment below. Thank you so much.